10 years have now passed since the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, and is still being debated. It should have been clear, so said Bergoglio on July the 12th, 2022, and we can only agree with him. In fact, don't you find it strange that a man as humble and modest as Joseph Ratzinger, having resigned, still chose to remain in the Vatican, wearing white, remaining in the way of his successor? And what about the fact that for over 9 years, Benedict continually said, there is only one Pope, without ever explaining which one of the two it was? It is not even clear how it was possible for him to be Pope Emeritus, since the position does not exist juridically, as has been noted from the very beginning by the most respected canonists. However, in order to get to the bottom of this mystery, Pope Ratzinger left us some keys to help us understand the canonical question. In his 2016 book interview, Last Conversations, with Peter Sewald, a text that was specifically authorized and approved by the Pope Emeritus, Benedict said in a reference to his own resignation, "No Pope has resigned for 1,000 years." The book reiterates this again and again towards the end when it states, Benedict XVI was the first Pope to resign after 1,000 years. But the trouble with this statement is that the last Pope to abdicate was Gregory XII in 1415, which was only 598 years before Ratzinger resigned in 2013, not 1,000 years. Thus, unquestionably, the word resignation did not mean the same thing as abdication for Benedict, and he did not consider himself to have been abdicated. Well then, what kind of resignation did he give? As we have recently discovered, there was a resignation very similar to his, exactly 1,000 years earlier in AD 1013 by Pope Benedict VIII, a medieval pope who also did not abdicate. An investigation has lasted 2.5 years, including over 400 articles and a best-selling book, the Ratzinger Code. We have patiently reconstructed the entire scenario. The atheist Paolo Flores d'Arcais explained in his 2010 work, Ratzinger's Obscurantist Challenge, how Benedict XVI had the fault of being the guardian of Christian values that were opposed to the globalist powers. As a result of WikiLeaks, we know that already in 2012, the Clinton-Obama administration was plotting the removal of Pope Benedict. It became necessary to replace him with a pope who would be more amenable to many other projects. The executive arm of this operation was a branch of the ultra-modernist cardinals, the so-called St. Gallen Mafia, the group that sponsored Bergoglio as the future pope, as was candidly admitted in 2015 by one of its members, Cardinal Daniels. In 2016, the Archbishop Ganswein quoted a speech by Ratzinger describing this group as representing a dictatorship of relativism that does not recognize anything as definitive and leaves only one's own ego and one's own desires as the final measure. In the same year, however, thanks to WikiLeaks, the so-called Mordkomplott also came to light, a plan to kill Pope Benedict, which was spoken about by Cardinal Paolo Romeo and Cardinal Dario Castrillon Hoyas, 3 bishops, Bishop René Gracida, Luigi Negri, and Jan Paolo Lenga, later affirmed publicly that Pope Ratzinger was forced to take himself out of the way. And so in 2013, pressured to abdicate in a way that was unsustainable for his strength, Benedict XVI decided to apply an ingenious anti-usurpation plan in order to defend the Church. On February 11th, in the presence of the Consistor of Cardinals in an entirely unexpected way, he read aloud a text in Latin containing only 262 words that would change history. In his Declaratio, made on the 11th of February 2013, which was filled with various errors in Latin and stylistic imperfections that were unexplainable for a distinguished Latinist like Ratzinger, we were told that the Pope announced that beginning at 8 p.m. on the 20th of February 2013, he would renounce his ministry so that the See of Rome would remain vacant. This at least was the translation in Italian and other vernacular languages that was communicated to us. But in reality, things were very different. And we know this thanks to an examination of the original Latin text. Just like a pope's election is a purely juridical act that must be simultaneous, since it is God who grants or withdraws the investiture of the successor of St. Peter, the so-called Petrine Munus, and certainly one cannot give God an assent that has an expiration date. The second problem concerns the munus itself. The Canon 332, paragraph 2 of the Code of Canon Law provides that a pope may abdicate, but only by renouncing the Petrine munus, that is, the title given to him by God. In short, he must renounce being pope. But in the Latin version of the Declaratio, the only one that is authoritative, Benedict XVI declares that he renounces the ministerium, the doing what a pope does, the exercise of power that derives from the munus. This distinction does not appear in Italian and other languages because both munus and ministerium are translated with the same word, ministry. And yet, renouncing one without the other can lead to devastating juridical consequences. Any synonymity between munus and ministerium is to be totally excluded, both because in all of canon law, the ministerium, the thing which Benedict resigned, always and only means doing, exercising an office, and also because Pope Benedict specifies in the Declaratio that the ministerium was granted to him per manus cardinalium, by the hand of the cardinals, who are able to confer on the newly elected pope only the authority to do what the pope does. Whereas the munus is granted by God himself at the moment of the election. So in order to abdicate, the Pope needs to renounce the munus in an instantaneous way. But Pope Benedict did the opposite. He renounced the ministerium in a deferred way. Once again, we have confirmation that the Declaratio was not an act of abdication. Finally, there is the third mystery to clear up, because the Pope cannot canonically separate the ministerium from the munus. But actually, this can happen in only one case, when there is a totally impeded see. The alternative to a vacant see, when the Pope has neither died nor abdicated, but is instead a prisoner, confined or exiled. In this case, the Pope still possesses the munus, the being Pope, but he is forcibly deprived of the ministerium, of the possibility of doing what a Pope does. In sum, if the Pope canonically loses the munus, there is a vacant see or sede vacante. But if the Pope is forcibly deprived of the ministerium, there is a totally impeded see. And now, by combining these three mysterious elements of the Declaratio together, it becomes perfectly clear what Benedict did. The key is found in the time at which the renunciation of the ministerium took effect. The translations of the Declaratio say that it would be at 8 p.m. on February 28th. But in Latin, Pope Benedict said it would occur at the hora vigesima, the 20th hour. Listen to him here.
Vigesimo ottavo febbraio, bis millesimo tredicesimo, hora vigesima, hora vigesima, hora vigesima, hora vigesima.
He is referring to Roman time, which was traditional in Italy and the Papal States since the Middle Ages. Roman time does not start counting the hours at midnight, but instead begins at sunset. On the 28th of February 2013, the sun set at 6 p.m., the hora prima. And so all we need to do is add 19 hours in order to find out exactly what the hora vigesima of February 28th was. It corresponds to 1 p.m. or 1300 hours on the 1st of March, according to our modern way of counting time. But what had just happened at 1 p.m. on March the 1st, 2013? As you may know, the official Vatican Bulletin comes out each day between 12 and 1 p.m. On that Friday, March the 1st, the Cardinal Dean Angelo Sodano convoked the new conclave by means of the bulletin, even though Pope Benedict had not abdicated. The conclave was thus illegitimate and produced a coup d'etat that automatically sent Benedict XVI into a totally impeded see. The canonical status we have spoken of, thereby depriving him of the ministerium, his ability to do what a pope does. After all, how is it possible to imagine that a pope could be more impeded than one who sees another pope elected in his place while he is still reigning? For this reason, Benedict kept his papal name and his papal robe, continued to give the apostolic blessing, which only the pope can give, and continued to reside in the Vatican. Not for nothing did he tell Archbishop Ganzman to say at the Lums University in Rome in October 2022, if you do not believe, the answer is found in the book of Jeremiah.
Non mi credono, però io ho detto obbedisco, o credete o non credete. Se non credete, leggete o Geremia o Jesaja in italiano, come dice Jesaja in italiano.
And here we have a clarification of the inexplicable 17-day deferment of the inexplicable renunciation of the ministerium.
Sapete che questo giorno mio è diverso da quelli precedenti. Non sono più pontefice sommo della Chiesa Cattolica, fino alle 8 di sera sono ancora poi non più.
On February 11, 2013, Pope Benedict foresaw and prophesied that the cardinals, distorting the Declaratio, based on its own translations, would unknowingly convene an abusive conclave, such that it would send him into an impeded see and deprive him of the ministerium, his ability to do what a pope does. His renunciation of the ministerium thus became effective and factual precisely at the hora vigesima on February 28th, that is at 1 p.m. on the 1st of March 2013, the hour in which he would no longer be the Pontiff Supreme, as he said from the balcony of Castel Gandolfo in his remarks on the 28th of February, reversing the title of the Supreme Pontiff. He would no longer be the Pontiff in the highest. But then, how can the phrase of the Declaratio be explained, which reads, I renounce the ministerium, in such a way that the See of Rome, the See of St. Peter, will be vacant? This translation is mistaken. First, because the renunciation of the ministerium does not produce a vacant see, but above all, because the Latin verb vacet is literally translated as the see will be empty, clear, and free. In fact, Pope Benedict left his seat empty. That is the cathedra of the Bishop of Rome in the Lateran Basilica, from which every pope formally draws his legitimacy to exercise his own government, and he never returned to it. Thus, continuing with the Latin text, the next conclave for the election of the new Supreme Pontiff, as at the time of his death, will have to be convoked ab his quibus competet, by those who are competent. That is, only the true cardinals named prior to 2013. Thus, Benedict became Pope Emeritus, or rather the Pope Impedidus, the impeded Pope. The similarity with a Bishop Emeritus, a retired bishop, was only apparent. In fact, a bishop may canonically retire when he turns 75, losing his ministerium, but maintaining the munus linked to his see. Pope, this can only happen by force, by impediment, because the munus of the Pope, his being Pope, cannot be shared with anyone. And this is why Benedict repeatedly said, there is only one Pope, and it was him. With this ingenious canonical system, Benedict ensured that thanks to his dethronement and imprisonment, which he himself induced and which the cardinals unknowingly carried out, he could remain the one true Pope, the custodian of the Petrine munus, placing his heretical enemies who wanted to remove him into schism. And he would do so in such a way that any other Pope who was elected while he was alive would not be a true Pope. The alleged Pope Francis is therefore an anti-pope. As such, his pontificate must be annulled. This is the canonical reality. Furthermore, there are a myriad of gestures and statements by Benedict XVI which confirm his reality in a logical way, and there is no need to be led astray by the concord that appeared to exist between the two men dressed in white. Pope Ratzinger himself wrote that his personal friendship with Francis had grown, a friendship that was personal, that is, friendship that was his alone, a one-way relationship. Benedict XVI, the last vicar of Christ, gave perfect fulfillment to Jesus' commandment, love your enemies and pray for your persecutors. In all these years, he wanted believers to be separated from non-believers, as he himself declared to herder correspondens, and for the sheep to recognize their true shepherd by his smell, the faith, and fortifying the papacy. Today the problem is communicating to the cardinals how this very special resignation of Pope Benedict took place, a resignation which brought the Church into a state of juridical suspension, a pontificate of exception for the last 10 years. As a matter of fact, Canon 335 prescribes that when the Roman see is vacant or entirely impeded, nothing is to be altered in the governance of the universal Church. Currently, our journalistic investigation is being censored both on social media and by the mainstream media, bullied and ostracized even by a certain traditionalist world that has an interest in maintaining the status quo. But the risk is enormous. If the next conclave includes only one of the 81 invalid cardinals appointed by anti-Pope Francis, another anti-pope will be elected who will also be devoid of the papal munus. And thus, seen from the viewpoint of faith, he will be devoid of the assistance of the Holy Spirit. This would mean at the end of the visible canonical church, with the continuation of Bergoglio's anti-papal line of succession. For this reason, when Peter Seewald asked Benedict if he could be the last pope, as we have known the papacy to be, he replied, everything is possible. Tutto può essere. How do we resolve this? A fearless canonical investigation promoted by the College of Cardinals is needed immediately. After all, if Bergoglio were to sanction a cardinal who merely wanted to clarify things, he would implicitly be admitting that he does not have his cards in order. Even easier, it would be enough to shout out for the truth to the whole world and explain it, and then the anti-pope would be forced to abandon the throne. Immediately afterward, it will be necessary to convoke a new conclave with the true cardinals appointed prior to 2013. It is already late. The deadline for convoking the conclave after the death of Benedict XVI was January the 20th, 2023. The Church is without a guide, without a pope. After more than 9 years of an impeded see, we are now currently in a sede vacante. It took 10 years, but the truth, as St. Augustine says, is like a lion. Once she is set free, she defends herself.